Hello, welcome to Mapping Global China Conversations. I'm Xiaojiao Wang, a postdoctoral fellow at NYU Shanghai. Today, I'm honored to have Xiaoxiao Jiang Kwete, who's a global health scholar and who's going to have a really fascinating conversation with us. So Xiaoxiao, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Xiaoxiao Jiang Kwete. I am a global health scholar. I have my own team and my own company. I get contracts from universities, both outside China and in China. And we do global health projects ranging from palliative care and cancer care and women and health, and also global aid and development. So
interesting. So I vaguely remember that Xiaoxiao, you have been trained in medical school.
Yeah.
So what led you to global health, and then you have your own company now. So what is your journey and what is the thing that you are currently dealing with?
So I graduated from Peking University Health Science Center, which is a medical school. My major was basic medicine. So we were trained to be a doctor and a scientist. But at that time, I was studying medicine. At the same time, I was very active in student activities. I was volunteering all kinds of events. So I was known for, like, whenever you need some extra hand, just call me. So this day I was called by my friend and say, Xiaoxiao, we have a conference on China-Africa health collaboration. They need volunteers. I say, sure, count me in. At that time, I knew nothing about this project or about this field.
So when was that?
That was in 2009.
Okay.
So I was a volunteer to that conference. And my job was to accompany one of the participants to that roundtable, who is Dr. Matthew Kamwa. He was the WHO representative to DR Congo. So my job was to hold his suitcase, took him to the hotel and then back to the venue. So I had a lot of opportunities to talk to him. And when I came into that conference, the way I think about global aid and development is that, wow, it's so nice, right? It must be amazing for developing countries to want to come to for developed countries to want to come to developing countries and help them with money, with people, with experts. But he really gave me a completely different perspective. Till this day, I remember what he told me. He said, no, it's actually not what happened. Those people, they came to our country. They would tear down existing systems. They build new systems that no one knows how to use. Then they just leave. So that was the eye-opening moment for me. I was like, wow, this is actually what would happen, right? It's completely different, or the opposite to what you would imagine. So that really made me intrigued to this field. And it's also through 5 years of medical school, I decided I'm not interested in cultivating cells in the lab or treating individual patients. I'm more interested in treating the whole society as my patient. So I decided to apply for global health and public health. I was admitted by Harvard School of Public Health. And at Harvard, every one of us were assigned an academic advisor. So that is usually a professor within our department. So for many other Chinese students, they would choose to become the RA, the research assistant, to that professor, so they can apply for PhD and then get a job later. They would follow that path, right?
Academic path.
Yeah, but my academic advisor was Dr. Daniel Wickler. He is an ethicist.
Oh.
And during our first meeting, he told me that, Xiaoxiao, I don't need an RA. I do my own research. So think about what you're really interested in. And I'm going to help you with what you want to do. So I started to, look back at my experience. That was already, I think, 2 years from my first talk with Dr. Matthew Kamwa at that conference, right? So I started to pick up that topic and say, well, the area I'm really interested in is global aid. And the specific question I'm asking is, how can it be better integrated into local system? And when I raised my question to Professor Daniel Wickler, he said, since you are interested in this field and you are Chinese, why don't you do that on the Chinese aid? Because you have an advantage and cultural and language advantage that few Western scholars have.
Yeah, and that's also the years when China has expanded the health aid to African countries, right?
That was early 2012, late 2011. That was the year when China published its first white paper on international aid.
So you entered into the field at the right time, right place, right?
Yeah, so Professor Wickler actually looked through Harvard for the right mentor for me to support my project. So at that time, in the 2 years between the master program, you were supposed to do a summer practicum. And so instead of like going to work for an existing organization or professor, I did my own study of the Chinese medical teams working in Kinshasa. And I had three mentors. One is Professor Klesis Struma from Harvard Kennedy School. That's the one that my academic advisor reached out for me. And then also Dr. Lucy Chen, who is from Peking University, who is the one that hosted the first China-Africa roundtable on China-Africa Health collaboration back in 2009.
Okay.
And then also another medical officer from the UK embassy in Kinshasa. I think it's Dr. Maini. Yeah, so I had three mentors to supervise my summer study.
So you're exactly the right person we should interview when we talk about global health in relation to global China studies. So I'm so happy you're here. So my next question is related to China's role in kind of integrating their aid and also their personnel as the Chinese medical team in African countries. How has China been promoting these efforts in helping African countries, especially the countries you are familiar with, the countries you have experiences working with? Do you want to introduce a little bit China's efforts in it and how China wants to push forward these efforts in the future?
It's a very big question. I don't know where to start because...
Maybe from your own experiences?
Yeah, many things come to my mind when you ask that question, right? Because I really learned a lot in my initial visit to Kinshasa to study the Chinese medical teams. I was able to spend, I think, 7 weeks working together with the Chinese medical teams every day.
Can I ask how large is the team? How many people?
18.
Oh, okay.
So what happened in Kinshasa in that hospital is that it's a Chinese Minister of Commerce who built that hospital. But the moment they finished the construction, it was handed over to the Congolese government. That's one thing that Chinese government would do, which is not usually seen by other donors, right?
So
they hand over the ownership.
Okay.
They hand over the ownership to local government.
That's interesting.
That's one thing. So that is a big hospital. It has about 150 doctors and nurses.
Okay.
It's run by the Congolese Minister of Health. And it has a medical officer, a medical director, who is a Congolese. So it's majority Congolese-owned, Congolese-run hospital. But then the Chinese medical team, these 18 people would come in more as an advisory role. So they have the Chinese medical team, they also have a team leader. He has an office right next to the medical director's office. But usually most of his job would do to provide advice, not to actually run the hospital, which is different from what you would see in DFID, USAID. When they do projects in there, either they would give money to local NGOs to run it, or they would send experts to actually run it like MSF.
Okay.
The MSF people are the people making decisions in that hospital, but not the Chinese medical teams.
So MSF, it means...
Médecins Sans Frontières.
Okay, so it's...
Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah, okay. Yes. It's the non-government organization.
NGO,
yes.
So when I started that project, right, I was given a task by Dr. Lucy Chen. Lucy was telling me that, Xiaoxiao, people in China are wondering, both the Chinese medical teams and the MSF, they are sending doctors to Africa, right? Why is MSF have so much higher or bigger global impact than the Chinese medical teams, right? You go find out.
Yeah. Oh.
So I said I spent 7 weeks working together with the Chinese medical teams, and then I spent 1 week working with the MSF team there. I was able to interview the project manager, and they also have a supply supply chain manager, and then their national director. So you can really see that when they go into an area, they are really in control. And MSF, because they are a politically neutral organization, they were able to recruit the best doctors and nurses from across the world. And those people have to be fluent in French, which is a local language, right? But for the Chinese medical teams, not so much, because they have to select from like the buddy system, which is the Hebei province. So you have to select doctors from the Hebei province. And then the Hebei government actually take it really seriously, right? They want to select more experienced doctors. But that means those doctors are in their 50s and 60s. It's very difficult for them to
kind
pick
of
up
like
French.
my aunt's doctors in Hebei.
Can you imagine? They have to learn French in 6 months. And those doctors, they stopped working for 6 months prior to going to Congo just to learn all these things, but it's still a little bit too difficult for them. So the language barrier is actually one of the main barriers. Almost all doctors were complaining to me because I had a 1-hour interview with each one of them.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I've learned so much from our conversations already.
I have, so let me finish that MSF part, right? So I do see that MSF have a lot of advantages by coming in as a international NGO that have a much larger expert pool, right? But they also have a lot of limitations. For example, the national director of MSF, he told me that we position ourselves as firefighters, not rebuilders. So we only go to areas of severe conflict or natural disasters, right? We build it up, then we need to leave. Because we are not there to build up the sustainable system. That's their limitation. And I think that's where the Chinese medical teams should fill in, because it is fundamentally a health system strengthening approach. In global health, there's vertical programs. You're only going in to treat HIV, treat TB. There's horizontal programs, which means we go there to support, to strengthen the whole system, that then you would be able to do all diseases better, right? There's a continuing call for these vertical programs to then diagonalize, meaning when you're treating HIV, can you also please train some healthcare workers so they can do other diseases later? So you strengthen the health system, right? The Chinese medical team program is naturally positioned to do that because they are there continuously. They can work directly with the doctors. They come in all kinds of different disciplines. They're not just there to treat HIV or TB or malaria. It comes in almost all the departments, the doctors needed in the hospital, right? So I was also able to interview the economic counselor at the Chinese embassy in Congo. Do you know why?
Why?
Because he's actually the person in charge of the medical teams. Because there's no health counselor. There's only economic counselor in charge of the medical teams. So I was asking, how are those doctors decided? How do you know which type of doctors do you select for this medical team, right? And he said, we just ask the local government.
That's a good strategy.
And it's because he's not a health expert. He would not coming in with their own agenda and story and expertise, like all these experts that UK, USAID, Clinton Foundation would come in. They would come in with their own agenda and say, hey, please do this because science, facts, expertise, international consensus. The Chinese, they come in and say, what do you want? So that's what I see is the most different between, the existing international donor system that I'm educated about, that I know from the classes and from working with people, and the Chinese medical teams that I came to know from that summer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've got so much information in my mind now. So if I were to summarize what you've just said, so first of all, because Mapping Global China, we're interested in the global infrastructure systems China is building along the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So first of all, the hospital that you worked in, it was built by China, right?
Yes.
And then the ownership is handed to the local government, which is the first step. We've built the ground system for them to flourish. And then we sent this medical team over there with experts in different areas in medicine, right?
Yep.
So that they could have the opportunity to work with the local medical system in a more general sense instead of treating just one type of disease, firefighting just the one situation, right? So that's the other difference between us and the MSF. What is it called? Médecins Sans
Or
Frontières.
the traditional ways of
doing it. Yeah. And then on the other hand, the small challenge we have is that the doctors are like my aunts, doctors in Hebei province, so that they are in their 50s, 70s, 60s. They are experienced doctors, but they may lack local knowledge or the language kind of skills that they need to be easier to communicate with local government and local people. So we have a lot of different and upper hand interesting points and interesting contributions to this existing global health system. But on the other hand, we also need to deal with a little bit of challenges. So my final question for this part is, going ahead, what do you envision the Chinese medical team and also Chinese global health aid to the countries you are familiar with? What would be the ideal vision that you have in your mind?
Before that, I want to make an addition. You say like small challenges of the language. Like there are many, many challenges, right? And I do want to point it out because that language barrier, it's only like the manifestation, right? It is those people, they were not trained for such tasks. Not only language, they don't know the local culture. They don't know health diplomacy, they don't know how to even get along with their fellow expatriates in Kinshasa. That people in DFID and USAID, they don't know what these people are doing, right? Because they are not in those parties or the meetings, conferences, because they are not there to explain themselves, to explain China's global health strategy. They are not in that circle. But that's just one. And two is that a lot of the Chinese, we're only talking about the Chinese medical teams who are doctors, who are trained to be doctors, right? They don't have the knowledge about global health, the history of global health, the global institutions of global health, how they've been operating, right? But if you look at a lot of China's global health professors, they are facing the same issue. And it will come back to our next topic is that when we study global health at Harvard, global health has three phases. The first is colonial times. Global health was developed during the colonial times as a discipline to treat the disease found in colony. That's the first phase, but that's the foundation because that's where a lot of the talents, the knowledge were built. And China do not have that base. That could be a good thing, but we do not have that accumulation, that historical accumulation. And then it's the second stage, which is the Cold War, where global health was used as a tool for international politics. US and Russia, Soviet Union at that time. But also it's because after the independence of many countries, they don't have a good relationship with their former colonizers. So the colonizers have to find another way to establish that tie. And usually global health was used as that sweetener to make that tie. But China does not have that need. It was not necessary for China to appeal so we have a tie because we supported your independence. We were your comrades, right? So we do not have that second phase where our experts have to think hard. How do I appeal myself? How do I convince you to do this? We also do not have that training because we don't need to. And then now global health has come to the third stage where they say, what is global health? Global health is about global equity. It's about how to promote health based on the principle that all men are equal. Then you come to this field, because all the experts in the former colonizing countries, they have gone through the first accumulation and then the second stage where they have to think hard about where they stand. So actually a lot of them, they do believe in the equity principle and they were able to articulate themselves very well because of that history. They know what people cares about. But Chinese, even global health scholars, they do not have that training, they do not have that mindset and awareness So that's why, we talk about decolonization. Very few scholars in China are enthusiastic about this topic, which, it says so much about where we are today.
So it's kind of like what you would think about as an antidote, I'd like to say, maybe also as a way out of this impasse that the Chinese medical teams in African countries. A way to do it is to provide a kind of training for those, a kind of education, ethical education as you received at Harvard Global Health Program, or are there any other ways that we could deal with it as you envision global China's role, a better kind of future with this system? What would you do if you have the resources and the opportunity to do it?
We definitely need more training, but because of what we discussed, we don't even have enough global health professors to train those doctors. That was the point, right? But again, if you take another look at it, look at the other side of it, the fact that we did not have to go through the first two phases actually makes us like more legit.
That's true.
To take the lead on the third phase, as long as we keep on, like we fully understand the principle of equity. And then we keep doing what we've been doing, which is treating developing countries as an equal partner. And that's what China has been doing, right?
And we need to retell the story, right?
We need to reiterate, rekindle our fire for this equity of principle of equity, which I don't really see. Like you have to see that you've been on the right side of history all along, and you have to know that this fight for equity is still needed. It hasn't stopped. Many people, they've got independence, but they are still living a lot of unequal situations. Like you have to look at the world with that glass.
Interesting. So Xiaoxiao, I know that you've been publishing and you published important pieces on decolonization of the health system, especially in Africa and in underdeveloped countries. So in your mind, what is the relationship between this decolonization and what you have just talked about, the equity mindset? What is the relationship between it and what is China's role and what would be China's kind of like difference and strengths in this field in comparison to the Western aid?
I have to say, when I first came into like studying global health, the word decolonization or like post-colonial, it really came to me in a few different occasions. It opened up my eyes by surprise. For example, the first time it came into my research subject was actually when I was interviewing the medical director of that hospital where the Chinese medical teams were working in Kinshasa. He is a Congolese, right? And he's a medical director, very educated, probably educated in Europe, which is the case of many doctors there. And I was interviewing him about this China-Africa collaboration. What do you think of it? It was a very general question. But he said one thing. He said, both China and Africa, we've been colonized before. And we have not colonized each other. Like, this is a very strong bond. We are brothers of suffering. So that like surprised me a little bit because you wouldn't really, you actually hear it a lot from the Chinese government, but it started to become a cliche. It was decolonization, but you stop paying attention to it. But then the Congolese medical doctor, very well educated, telling me this is the moment of bonding. And then you started to really think, okay, it actually means a lot to them. And then so when I came back to Harvard from that trip from Kinshasa, I started talking to Professor Zhuma, my mentor at Harvard Kennedy School, right? And then at that time, I have not really like established my conviction that the Chinese, a lot of what the Chinese are doing is actually really helping the Africa, really helping it to develop, right? So a lot of our discussions became, I would throw out all these anti-Chinese like ideas or claims, and then he's a Kenyan, he would be the one to oppose me, right? For example, I say, hey, people are saying China is committing neo-colonialism, and then he would say that only the old colonizers would look at other people who want to come in and help Africa this way. So it's actually him, an African professor from Harvard Kennedy School, that established my faith in China's aid to Africa. I remember one day I was even a little bit bothered. I was like, why are you so pro-China? Right? And he instantly responded and said, I'm not pro-China. I'm pro-Africa. I am supporting China's investment in Africa because this is the best thing for Africa. So it really helped me to understand what's happening. That a lot of the times it's because we don't know how to tell the story. That we have a lot of misunderstanding, and then bad things do happen. There are bad people, but then it was blown out of proportion on the international media and all that. So yeah, he planted that seed on me that I'm still firmly believe China is the best thing for Africa.
And the best party that could kind of push forward the decolonization of the health system over there, right?
Because China did it itself. And you would imagine that too many Chinese people might not realize what an amazing thing it was. And truly, completely, ultimately independence. Because many other countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, they did not actually achieve true independence, right? I was in Zambia 2 years ago, 2022, and because Patrick's parents are still living there, and we were talking to his childhood friends, and then I was learned, like just, people talking there that this is out of my research, so I don't know how true it is, but I've heard it from African people talking about it. And I just thought of it now. I hope it's okay to share.
Definitely. Yeah.
They say there's actually like 4 major white families that's running the Zambian economy right now, to the point that the Zambian Minister of Finance even set up a special office to liaise with these families.
Okay.
So they own most of the supermarket on the street that you can think of, the playground and the schools and all that. So, and then you would think of the situation in South Africa, right? The white population, 10% or 20% of the population, but 70% of the land. And then you imagine in Latin America, it's still happening. So these people, they have not come to a point where they are really self-governed.
So yeah, that's an interesting point. That also kind of gets me thinking, because at Mapping Global China project, we've been thinking about China not only as a subject to study, but also as a method, as a kind of way of looking at things, as a perspective to look at those global issues. I think from your perspective, it's a good point to see China as a truly independent country out of the colonization history. So
many people might not understand how close, because I know Africa, I'll use Africa as an example. How close is Africa to its colonial past? I'll give you another example. We were in Kinshasa back in 2022, and I still work with different universities in the US, right? And my US colleague were calling me and said, hey, Xiaoxiao, there's this lady from Belgium, and she also works in palliative care, which is my field. And she happens to be in Kinshasa for the few days that I was there for a conference. Say, why don't you guys meet? And then you can talk. Maybe you can think of some projects to do, right? I say, sure. Let's have a conversation. We were in the hotel room. So Patrick overheard this conversation, right? I put down my phone, and then he turned to me and said, are you kidding me? You're gonna work with the Belgians on a project in Congo? And that is a moment I was like, wow, I started to take a step back and think. Maybe if a Japanese want to do a project in China, I would have extra questions to make sure that they have good intentions, right? But when it's come to other countries, I did not have that sensibility. But when he confronted me or just raised it up to my face, then I started to realize how close that history is still to them. Because just earlier that year, I think back in March or April 2022, the current Belgian king visited Kinshasa for the very first time.
Okay, I think.
And then in his talk, he apologized for the colonial ruling that his father very cruelly governed. That was the time with all the hand cutting, all the exploitation, and all that happened. And that is his father. And during that trip, he also returned something special for the Congolese people. It's a tooth of Patrice Lumumba. That's their founding father, who was assassinated, beaten to death, beaten and then killed, and then cut into pieces. With the only remain is that one tooth. So if you imagine the equivalent, I always say Patrice Lumumba is like Chairman Mao to Congo.
Okay.
So if Chairman Mao is assassinated by, I don't know, Japanese Royal Institute, and then his body only tooth remain was kept there until 2022. Then you can imagine the colonial past, how much it's still weighing on the Congolese people.
That's interesting. So in this background, maybe it's a good time for us, right, to reimagine how China could integrate in this system to bring this fresh air to this already loaded history and the very close colonial past of these places. And then it is important, according to Xiaoxiao, right, to reiterate, to tell a better story, how we are going to do something different, how we are going to achieve equity over there, how we are going to decolonize the whole system, right, in terms of global health. So this is really interesting to know the background. And then I know better the role that we have in front of us, and maybe it's more promising than we imagine us to be in this new field. And the next question is a kind of like a large question, but you can answer it with your own personal experiences. So it's about the global and local theory and the practice kind of divide, right? Because we talk about global health, we talk about China, Chinese doctors going to Africa to help them, we do infrastructure over there. But on the other hand, how we are going to better really communicate with local people, how we are going to really respond to their needs. And on the other hand, with those doctors with a lot of experiences, with a lot of expertise in their own field, how are they going to put them into practice as advisors or as expertise in this different field, right? So do you have anything on your mind, any suggestions, any experiences that you had about this global versus local theory versus practice kind of question?
I think there's a lot of issues with the global health, like how this whole global health as a business, as a research area, as a practice is being operated right now. And it actually has a lot to do with decolonization.
Okay.
Is because decolonization is not finished. There's a lot of colonial vestige in this field.
For instance, can you...
So in global health, there's actually a lot of money flowing, right? And where do you spend the money? That's a very important question. But right now, to answer that question, the vast majority of the people, which are the people of the low and middle income countries, have very little say
in how to spend the money.
Yeah. So you would see that in the past, I would say 20, 30 years, the majority of the money in global health, WHO, World Bank, they went to infectious diseases.
Okay.
And it was actually stemmed from earlier rhetoric by I think US CDC or there to say that, they want to convince the US people, right, why we are doing global health is because we want to prevent those infectious diseases from coming to the mainland.
Okay.
From coming to the homeland. So it's for homeland security. And then for HIV, right, let's just take HIV for example. Okay, HIV, most of the HIV patients are in Africa, right? Then you come in to decide, okay, well, let's accept that a lot of the money will go to HIV. Okay. But how are you going to spend money within HIV? You can do prevention, right? You can educate people. You can use condoms. You can use other ways. You can do stop the transmission from mother to infants and all that. But somehow it ended up, the majority of the money went to the treatment, the pharmaceutical products, not the prevention. So Africa would see more and more HIV patients that needing the treatment, and then the money would go from US taxpayers to the government to those pharmaceutical companies who are providing treatment. I don't think the US people like that. And that's why you see anti-globalization movement, because people from the bottom, even people in high-income countries, they are not the one benefiting from this so-called concept of global solidarity, which is the foundation for global health.
That's a wonderful answer and a great example. So it's not only for the local people in Africa, but also for US kind of lower income community. They don't see the solidarity. They only see the government splash money in areas that they don't want them to splash the money to.
And not even the most efficient way.
Yes, and not the equity way of doing it.
I do want to say one more thing since we're talking about the people in high-income countries, right? And I think in global health, we should definitely avoid pitching the people in high-income countries against the people in low and middle-income countries, saying that you guys have to give money so we can treat more people here. No, it's equity, right? There's also a lot of inequity within high-income countries. Yeah. If you follow through the principle of equity, it should be for the benefit of all.
Yeah, especially when we talk about globalization today, it's pandemic, right? When we talk about global health, it's about pandemic, and it's about one gets it and everyone on this planet is not kind of being protected of this disease.
Like the true realization of globalization should benefit all, like people everywhere. And I want to mention another thing is, I'm not a historian, but I try to educate myself in this topic, is that in 1960, DR Congo gained independence, right? They gained independence because of two things. One, the Congolese people fought. Patrice Lumumba was one of the organizers who organized the resistance. They fought hard.
Against the Belgian.
Yes, colonizers. And two, is that the Belgian people started going to streets, protesting against their own government for those atrocities they are doing in Congo. Their own government, that takes, I think, more courage to do. And they are doing that. So if the Belgian government, they would not respect the independence of Congo, they would lose legitimacy in their own land. So this is independence, the emancipation movement, it's a success by people both from low and middle income countries and high income countries. It's because we were united.
Yes.
But now we started to be split again. We lost that sense of solidarity and connection.
That's a great point. That's also part of my research is about the global 1960s, the moment when revolutionaries, when progressive young people around the globe kind of forged this solidarity across global north and global south. But today it's kind of like the neoliberal system really has torn us apart. That's something that we really need to think about rebuild, right?
Yes.
That's a great point. And my very last question, because you have so many interesting experiences, you have written about these interesting topics. If there's one book you would recommend to someone like me who's a layman to global health studies to read, what would be the book? Which one would you recommend?
As like a first book, right, as an introduction to global health, I would definitely recommend the Reimagining Global Health by Dr. Paul Farmer. He was a professor at Harvard Medical School. He passed away a few years ago in Rwanda. Totally unexpectedly. Yeah, I was in his class. He was teaching a class called Delivery Science in Global Health, and then each class was a small case where they discussed the colonial past of global health, how it's still remaining in global health, and how can we really, through our practice and research, be able to amend that. For example, it's through his class that I learned about the history of Haiti, because he spent a lot of time there, even prior to the earthquake. I learned that when the Haitians, they gained independence from the French government, they had to pay back to the French government for losing their assets, which are the slaves. Can you imagine how insane that is? And the French government accepted that. They forced that. They spent over 100 years paying back that debt. About $20 billion, that could worth like $200 billion now. Imagine how that will cripple their economy. The French government is not thinking about paying back that. It's another discussion about the decolonization.
Yes.
What about all the wealth that was taken by force? When are you going to give it back?
Are we going to redistribute?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Xiaoxiao. I'm looking forward to reading that book and looking forward to continuing our conversations in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.